As you use the Trackdrive phone system, you're going to want to invite employees, buyers, traffic sources, different people to see your system, but on a limited view. So I've created a few teams already in your system that will be used for defaults. Okay, the super users team, you wouldn't copy this team. You would just add employees to it that are going to have full access to your system. So you would invite John Doe at yahoo.com and Mary Smith at gmail.com, whatever. They're going to get an email from our system that says you've been invited to use in this case it's a Trackdrive demo account as a super user. They'd set their password and they'd be able to log in. When they first log in, however, they're going to have just our default colors up there and their name up here. They won't be looking at your system as a super user because they do have their own fully functioning account. They'll want to go up to company and change company and then pick your company as the company they're working on. The concept of the entire team system in Trackdrive is that no matter how many teams you're on, you're only going to have one login to the system, and you can switch from team to team and have different permissions on team to team. You might have full access to your own system, but someone invited you as a traffic source to see your calls on their system that you're responsible for, and you would have a limited view of the menus based on what they set in your permissions. So the super users team, don't copy that one, just keep listing people that have full access to your system, and when we say full, that's everything. They can change billing, add cards, delete buyers, everything. We have also on the teams some dummy ones I set up for you. You can tweak what the defaults are going to be, but for the most part, people are kind of happy with these defaults. You're going to come in, let's say you're adding a traffic source to come see you. You're going to go to Teams and click on Copy Team. Copy this traffic source team template. So now it's got everything in it that I set up in that first record, the template record, so you can name this, add some people, and fill out the form. So you're going to say this is John Doe's traffic source, put his email address here, or email addresses if he has multiple people that are going to see this team. You would not check on super users or you had full access to your system. You can turn on APIs for any team member. They'll just be able to only see when they make API requests things that you've given them permission for below. So I would not turn on the API access unless they ask for it, but if they do, you have nothing to worry about. They can only see what you give them permission to see. Now for traffic sources, we have that enabled. You don't give them access to all sources, obviously. This would be an employee setting. That's not a super user. So a super user that can't see all traffic sources, or can see all traffic sources but isn't a traffic source, you just turn that on there. Otherwise, you would pick the traffic sources that this team can see. Usually it's only one, but if you had multiple traffic source IDs, you could do multiple ones there. And typically they can see all the stuff about the traffic source record, the ID you gave it, the name of it. They can see the numbers you've assigned to them. They can see the company name you put in the record, and they can see the calls they're responsible for. A traffic source typically is not going to have access to buyer groups or buyers, but they do need to see their offers. Because a traffic source call could be routed off to different offers that they don't get to see those calls for, maybe if they capped or whatever, you do have to give them permission to the offers they can see their numbers for and their calls for. But we're only going to let them see the ID and the name and not have much more permissions to work on the offers. Traffic sources would also see their numbers so they know which numbers they can run. You don't have to list a traffic source's numbers here. This number selection thing here is for if someone needs to see a number that they don't have permissions as the traffic source to see. So you do not have to list them, but we're going to let them see the numbers, which offer it belongs to, the traffic source assigned to it, and the filters. We're not going to show a traffic source where the calls can route to, and we're not going to show them which provider the phone number they have is coming from. And then on the calls, we're not going to allow them to see all calls, again, kind of an employee setting. We'll let them see the number the call came in on, the offer the call came in on, which traffic source and sub IDs were assigned. We probably don't show them anything to do with caller ID or which buyer took the call because they're the traffic source. We'll let them see the city, country, and state. The tokens, if you're letting someone use your ring pools to optimize their ad spend, you would turn this on. It's highly, very rare that people are letting someone use their number pool, but it's a great selling feature for you. If you have a traffic source, excuse me, using ad cache or pop cache or some kind of ad network, and they want to send you all their calls, but they'd like to use your system to figure out what's working and save some money on their ad spend, you could certainly turn on tokens, and then down here in the token access, you tell them which tokens they could see, perhaps S1 and S2, and that's all they get to see. Typically, a traffic source is not going to see how long the call was in the IVR on Trackdrive or listen to the recordings, but some would. Their hold duration, how long it was on hold before the buyer picked up, and the answer duration they would see because that's what they're getting paid on. And you wouldn't show the total duration, which is the combination of IVR, hold, and answered. Excuse me. You would show them how many repeat calls you have and the status of each call they send you. You wouldn't show them what's going on with the buyer's conversions and how much you're getting paid by the buyer, but you would show them how many duplicate calls they sent you, how many calls they converted, and what their payout's going to be. Now, some traffic sources, let's say perhaps you were splitting costs with them, phone costs with them, you could show them the call cost so that they could pay 50% of it or whatever. Okay? And then you'd create the team. A buyer team that we're going to copy is slightly different on what they're going to see. So let's go to the buyer team template and copy that. Again, I just name it, put in the emails that are going to be invited. Not a super user API we talked about. They wouldn't see your traffic sources. If you have a buyer that's given you multiple phone numbers and you had to put them in a buyer group, it'd be easier for you to list the buyer group here, turn that on, list the buyer groups that are associated with this team, and then you can figure out what you're going to show them as far as buyer groups go. Typically just the name of the buyer group and probably their total caps, so they know where they are in the buyer group for their total spend. Maybe you'll let them see all the buyers you've assigned to the group so they can keep up with that. However, if you don't have buyer groups, you'd be listing each individual buyer separately here. And in this situation, we'd let them see their ID. Why not let buyers update the phone numbers? If you were out to lunch or it was a weekend and they had a problem with their phone number, if you give them access to edit their phone number in their buyer record, they could fix that without even contacting you. Now, there's lots of options in here that you're going to change depending on the buyer that you're working with. You probably just let them see the name, but you can change anything to update that you like. The ring timeout, how long we're letting their phone ring before we pull it back and give it to someone else. If we're sending them DTMF tones to get past their IVR, you probably wouldn't show them that. Easily let them see the time zone you set them up in. Probably not showing them filters, you may or may not. You probably let them see whether they're paused or not, but on a buyer-by-buyer basis, depending on how much traffic you have, you may give your buyers the ability to pause themselves if they need to stop for a bit. By default, I usually set this up for read, but if you let all your buyers edit their pause flag on their own, certainly turn that on for the template that they can update their buyers. You're not going to let them change whether calls are recorded or not typically, but you could. Caller ID obfuscation, when we're not setting in the right caller ID so they don't know who's calling, you probably wouldn't let them change that. You don't let them see how we're routing by tier, by revenue per call or earnings per call. View calls, obviously you'd probably let your buyers see their calls. They're paying for them. Tier and weight, you may or may not let them see that, or if they have a buyer group and they're actually maintaining all their own buyers, they're like a reseller on their system, you may indeed let them change the weight, for example. Probably not the tier because they could bump themselves up in your rotation. You probably wouldn't give them that. I have it set to let them see all of their caps and all their conversion settings. But in here is very important. If you're going to do the real-time bidding system, you probably would set it up that all of their buyers can change how much they're paying per call. If we're routing the calls based on how much they're paying, the priorities are based on how much they're paying. You still have the ability to edit the range in the buyer record on how much they can bid, so they can't go too low. But having this turned on for update if you're using a real-time bidding system will help you create your buyers easy. And then they do not need to see offers as buyers or the numbers the calls are coming in on, so you leave that off. And then as far as calls go, these are probably some pretty good settings, and I kind of went over there when I talked about the traffic source, what you'd let them see. The only thing that's a bit confusing for a buyer is if you are obfuscating them in the buyer record, you wouldn't show them the real caller number in the reporting because they'd be able to call that back. You were trying to block it and you're showing them the real one, they'd be able to block it. So you'd probably turn off real caller and show them the obfuscated caller ID if you are obfuscating. And then you can optionally also turn on that if the buyer paid for the call, we'll show them the real caller ID only if they paid for the call. Otherwise, they only see the obfuscated one. And then the rest of these things you can turn on and off. They probably don't see anything about traffic sources. And again, maybe if you have your buyer splitting costs with you, you show them the call cost.